Today I want to share with you a heartfelt story of love, sacrifice, and the quiet courage it takes to hold on when the world says let go. It's a tale of a young Apache man and a rancher's daughter bound together despite every barrier laid before them. Now let me begin. The wind carried voices in this country. At least that's what the old people said. And though Ten Crow had lived long enough to believe it. That afternoon it came down from the ridges of the Salt River Canyon, dry and restless, shaking the cottonwoods until their leaves glittered silver against the light. He stood beneath them, listening as if the branches might tell him which way his life should bend. He was 27, Apache by birth, a hunter by necessity. His world was measured not in coins or deeds, but in boot tracks, the bend of grass, the smoke of distant fires. His spear hung across his shoulder, his quiver resting light against his back. He hadn't loosed an arrow all morning. He wasn't hunting for meat. Not really. The truth was, he had been trying to outwalk his own heart. Ope Whitmore had not come in 5 days. Not since the harvest moon, when she'd run to him barefoot through the meadow grass, laughing like a girl half her age, her hair flying, her hands grasping his, as though she meant to hold him against the world. That night they had spoken little. They hadn't needed to. Every word had lived in the way her cheek pressed to his chest, in the way her breath slowed to match his. For those few hours he had felt against all sense that love could build a wall strong enough to keep out everything else. But the world always found its way. Back in even now he felt it in the change of wind, in the hush that came over men when he walked near, in the way women at the well pulled their children closer as he passed. He did not need to hear their words. Silence was louder than any insult. Owen left the cottonwoods behind and descended toward the draw where he kept his camp. His boots scuffed at loose stones, his stride as fluid as water over rock. A dog padded beside him half hound, half mongrel, with a ragged patch of bristly hair along its neck. He had named it Bristle for that flaw. And the animal followed him with the loyalty of something that had learned hunger and chose instead to trust. When he reached his camp, a small clearing hidden by moss white. The fire pit lay cold. He crouched by the ashes, sifting them between his fingers. The stones around the pit hadn't shifted, but the dirt nearby carried a mark. A small foot. A woman's step, light, recent, his chest tightened. Ope had been here 2 days ago, maybe less. She had come looking. He rose slowly, brushing dust from his palms, and stared into the distance, where the river bent through red rock. He could almost see her there, blue dress catching the wind, eyes bright with stubborn fire. He had known her since she was a girl of 17, wrestling calves on her father's spread. Back then he had been passing through on an errand, little more than a shadow with a bow. She had looked at him without flinching, and later, when no one was watching, slipped him an apple in silence. That single kindness had cut deeper than any wound. Since then they had stolen what time they could. In orchards, in hidden meadows, under skies thick with stars. They had never spoken of the future. The present had been miracle enough. But miracles were not meant to last. A twig snapped. Owen turned, every sense sharpening, and then he saw her. Ope Whitmore stood at the edge of the clearing, breathless from the climb. A canteen dangling from one hand. Dust streaked her dress. Strands of hair clung to her neck where sweat had dampened it. Yet even here, flushed and worn, she carried the grace of someone who had never bowed her head to gossip. I waited, she said simply. Owen did not answer. You didn't come. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with hurt. I had to hunt. You always have to hunt. Silence pressed between them. Briste gave a low whine and settled into the shade. Ope stepped closer, searching his face. He spoke to you, didn't he? Owen looked past her at the trees. My father, she pressed. He called you to him. He hesitated, then gave a single nod. Her jaw set and you stood there while he told you you're not fit to breathe the same air. That's what he does. He makes everything small enough to crush. Is your father, Owen said quite quietly. That doesn't make him right. The wind stirred her dress, lifting the hem. She reached out, touched his arm. Don't let him chase you off. Don't let him decide for us. Do you think I care about horses or houses or polished boots? Do you think I'd trade you for some banker with papers in his pocket? A pulled back, gentle but firm. You deserve more than me, Ope. Her eyes widened. Don't do this. You deserve a home with a roof that doesn't leak. A man who can walk through town without shadows following him. You deserve peace. Her voice broke. You don't want peace if it means losing you. He closed his eyes. For a long breath he stood there, the sound of the cottonwoods whispering above like judgment. Then he forced himself to speak. Love doesn't fill a larder. Love doesn't keep firewood stacked when winter comes. Love doesn't stop men from spitting when your name is tied to mine. I don't care. You should. No, Open, she said fiercely, stepping close until her eyes blazed into his. You should care that I chose you, and I choose you still. I would rather live in a lindo with you than in my father's house without your hand in mine. I am not afraid of hunger. I am afraid of a life where you are not. The words struck like arrows. He bowed his head, unable to meet her gaze. He had wanted her safe, wanted her to turn away before the world broke her on his account. But here she stood, stubborn as the cottonwoods, umbindin. You don't know what you're choosing, he whispered. Maybe not, she answered, her hand sliding down to clasp his, but I know who. The wind softened, carrying the faint scent of river water and distant woods. Obin felt his resolve unravel. He had tried to be stone, but stones, though, cracked under weather and time. He didn't move when she pressed her forehead to his. Didn't they pull away when her hand tightened around his? And for the first time in 5 long days, he let himself breathe her name in the wind. Ope. The day after their meeting beneath the cottonwoods, Owen rode down into Grady's Fork for the first time in weeks. He kept to the edge of town, where the road bent past the livery stable, and the air smelled of horses and dry hay. His bow hung across his back, and his steps drew as whether he wanted them or not. Folks had always noticed him, but lately their stares lingered longer, edged sharper. By the time he reached the mercantile, the whispers had already started. That's him, Whitmore's girl's shadow. Dogged he stayed out in the hills. Guess not far enough. Harold won't let this stand. You see. Obin pretended not to hear. Pretending was half his laugh. He bought a sack of flour, a coil of twine, and a tin of coffee necessities, nothing more. As he turned to leave, the storekeeper, a thin man with a walrus mustache, avoided his eyes, but said in a low voice, "You best watch your step, 10 Crow. Men talk when they've had whiskey, and some talk don't end well." Obin nodded once, neither grateful nor angry. He knew the truth in those words. That evening, just as the sun set behind the red ridges, he heard hoofbeats approaching his camp. He rose, oar in hand, and waited. A rider came into view, tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, wearing a grey coat. Even the wind couldn't wrinkle. Harold Whitmore. Obin straightened, every muscle tight. Whitmore dismounted slowly, his boots striking the dirt with a sound of ownership. Like each step claimed the ground. He was a man in his 50s, hair silvering at the temples, but his eyes sharp, steel grey. A rancher, yes, but more than that, a man who had once worn the stripes of a cavalry officer, who had learned command like other men learned prayer. "10 Crow," he said, voice flat. Whitmore. For a long moment, neither moved. The dog Bristle growled low. But Owen silenced him with a gesture. "You know why I'm here," Whitmore said. Obin said nothing. "I'll make this plain. You stay away from my daughter." The words carried no heat, no rise. They were delivered like orders in a camp, final and complete. Owen's jaw tightened, but he answered with respect. "Ope is not a child." "She is my child," Whitmore snapped. The first crack of anger in his voice. Then softer but sharper. "What can you give her? You sleep under brush roofs and eat from traps. You've no cattle, no land, no future a woman can lean on. Love won't keep a roof over her head." Obin forced himself to remain steady. "He can keep her safe." Whitmore stepped closer, his shadow stretched long across the dust. "Safe. You make her the talk of every table in this valley. Men will spit at her name. Children will taunt any babe she bears. Is that safety? The words landed like stones. Owen felt their weight settle deep. "You don't question your courage," Whitmore continued. "Ebe heard the stories, your skill with a bow, the fights you walked away from. But courage isn't bred, and skill doesn't put a roof over a family. Do you want to prove yourself? Prove it by leaving. That is the only gift you can give her." The silence stretched. The wind sighed through the moss quiet, stirring dust at their feet. Finally, Owen spoke low and rough. "You love her." Beat Morris has hardened, then let her go. For a long moment, Owen looked at the older man. He saw no malice there, only conviction born of pain. He remembered stories how Whitmore's younger brother had died in a raid during the war with the Apache. He knew some wounds never closed, so Owen bowed his head, not in surrender, but in respect. "He will not trouble her." Whitmore studied him another beat, then turned and mounted. Before he rode away, he said, "Good men know when to walk away. Don't make me remind you of that." The sound of hooves faded into the hills. Night swallowed the canyon. Owen stood unmoving, hands trembling, though his face gave nothing away. The next day, Hope came. She found him by the river, mending his snare lines. Her steps were quick, her eyes full of questions. "You spoke to him," she said breathless. Owen kept his eyes on the wire. "Yes." "What did he say?" "That you deserve better." Her face flushed with anger. "Better. Better than love. Better than truth." He set down the snare, finally meeting her gaze. The storm in her eyes nearly undid him. "Ope. Do you think love will silence the world? It won't. They will call you names, drag you through mud. Your father is right. You will carry shame not meant for you. You don't care. You should." Her voice broke. "No, Owen, you should. You should care that I've chosen you. That I would stand against every whisper in town if it meant keeping you." He turned away, the pain slicing him open. He had to cut her free before the world crushed her. So he forced words he did not believe through lips that burned with every syllable. "You are blind, Ope. What we had, it was nothing. A game between a curious girl and a fool who thought himself more than he is." Her face drained of color. "I never wanted this," he said, each word like a blade against his heart. "Go home. Forget me. There is nothing here for you." For a long moment, she stood frozen. Then tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She lifted her chin, voice trembling, but proud. "You can push me away with lies, Owen Diescro. But lies don't change the truth." She turned and walked back through the cottonwoods, her figure fading into the distance. When she was gone, Owen sank to his knees beside the river, hands clutching the earth as though he might tear out the pain by its roots. But the pain stayed. It always stayed. The cost of silence had been paid, and it was heavier than any burden he had carried by. The cottonwoods along the river whispered at dusk, their silver leaves tossing in the fading light as if trying to hold back night. Hope Whitmore sat on the bank, knees drawn to her chest, staring into the slow current that carried both light and shadow. She had been coming here every evening since Owen had turned her away. The first night she had stood for hours, expecting him to step from the trees to say he hadn't meant the cruel words, that it had been some terrible mistake. The second night she had come with a lantern and a shawl, waiting until the flame guttered low. By the third, she no longer expected him to appear, but could not stop herself from coming all the same. It was the only place that still smelled of him, smoke and pine pitch and river water. She remembered how he once showed her where the minnows darted beneath the shallows, how he could place his hand on the earth and tell if deer had passed by that morning. He had lived in this world the way she could only dream, attuned to it, as if his blood carried the rhythm of wind and stone. She loved him not just for who he was, but for how he taught her to see the world differently. And now he was gone. Or worse, he was near, but locked behind words that cut deeper than knives. Ope lifted her chin, blinking back tears. No, he had lied. She knew it in her marrow. Owen Tincrow loved her. A man who spoke with his eyes, with his hands, with the silence of his presence, could not erase all that with a few hard sentences. It was trying to protect her, foolish though it was. She would not let him decide her life for her. The river carried her though into the dark. High above, hidden in the shadows of the ridge, Owen watched. He had seen her come each evening, sitting like a lone sentinel by the water. He told himself he only kept watch to make sure she was safe, that the country carried wolves, both four-legged and two-legged, and that leaving her unguarded was something even a liar could not do. But the truth was cruel. He could not stay away. He watched the curve of her shoulders, the stubborn tilt of her head, the way she smoothed her dress as if preparing for company. Each gesture tore at him, because he knew she was waiting for him, and that he should not give her what she asked. When she finally rose and left, lantern swinging faintly, he followed at a distance, a ghost among the mows quiet, until she reached the safe glow of her father's ranch lights. Only then did he return to his camp, where the fire burned low and the silence pressed heavy. That night, unable to sleep, Owen took out a scrap of paper and the stub of a pencil. He wrote clumsy words in English, words he had never dared say aloud. Ope, I lied to save you. Forgive me. The world is crueler than I am strong. But my heart is yours until it stops beating. He folded the note, stared at it, then crushed it in his fist and tossed it into the flames. The fire devoured his confession, leaving only ash. 2 more nights passed. Ope returned to the river each time, though her father questioned her absences. She answered with vague words, and Harold with more, though sharp-eyed, did not press. Perhaps he feared what he already suspected. On the 5th night, Hope decided waiting was not enough. If Owen would not come to her, she would heed him. At dawn, she saddled a mare and rode toward the hills, her heart steady with resolve. The path wound through rocky outcrops, where scrub jutted between stone, and the air grew cooler beneath higher ridges. She had ridden these trails before, guided by Owen himself, who showed her where to find fresh water, where the earth held caves cool even in summer heat. She reached the clearing where his camp lay. Smoke from a small fire drifted into the sky. Relief surged in her chest proof. It was still here, still breathing the same air. Ope dismounted and stepped into the clearing. Owen was crouched by the fire, feeding it with dry branches. He looked up as she approached, his face unreadable, the lines of exhaustion etched deep. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. And yet I am, she answered. He rose to his full height, the bow at his side like a sentinel. Your father will. My father will say what he always says, she interrupted. That you are not enough, and I deserve better, but I am not his to barter. Owen's jaw clenched. Do you think it is so simple? It is, she said fiercely. I love you. You love me. The rest is noise. His hands tightened at his sides. Noise can kill hope. It can follow you every day until you can't breathe. It will break you. Then let it break me, she said, stepping closer. At least I will break beside you. Not apart from you. He shook his head, torn between desire and duty. You don't know what you're choosing. Maybe not, she whispered close enough now that her breath touched his cheek. But I know who I'm choosing. For a long moment, Owen stood rigid as if carved from stone. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods, carrying the faint scent of river water. His eyes closed. When they opened again, something had shifted. He no longer stepped back. Instead, he reached for her hand, rough palm closing around her slender fingers, and held on as if letting go would mean death itself. Ope's eyes shone with Tarsus, but her voice was steady. That's all I've asked. For the first time in many nights, Owen let himself breathe freely. He knew the world would come for them. With words sharper than knives, with stares heavier than chains. But in that moment, under the trees and the endless scale of Sifi, he could believe in one truth. She had waited, and he had come. The next Sunday dawned cool with a thin veil of cloud drifting across the Arizona sky. Church bells rang faint from town, their echoes traveling up the valley, cloths yet insistent. Ope Whitmore dressed in her plainest gown, her hair tied neatly back. Beside her, Owen Ten Crow walked with quiet steps, shoulders squared as though preparing for battle. They walked not toward the church, but toward the Whitmore ranch house. The house loomed larger the closer they came. With the clapboard, 2 stories, with a wide porch shaded by columns. It was the kind of house built not just for shelter, but to proclaim wealth. Horses grazed in the pasture, and the sound of cattle carried faint from the barns. For Ope, it was the house of her childhood. For Obin, it had always been a fortress of exclusion. Hope's hand was locked in his, fingers laced tight. She had insisted, if we are to be together, we do not hide. Not from my father, not from anyone. Obin had wanted to argue Riku, to tell her that some doors were better left closed. But when he looked at her eyes steady, her jaw set like stone, he knew she would not bend. And part of him, a part buried beneath caution, wanted to stand beside her openly. They reached the porch. Ope lifted her chin and knocked. For a moment, only silence. Then the door opened. Harold Whitmore stood framed in the threshold, his grey coat buttoned, his boots polished, his face composed like a man accustomed to command. His eyes flicked from his daughter to the man at her side. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Behind him, Margaret Whitmore appeared, her apron dusted with flour, her hand stilling when she saw who stood outside. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in something harder to read. Grief perhaps, or recognition. Hope tightened her grip on Owen's hand. "Father," she said evenly, "I've brought Owen." The silence stretched long enough for the sound of cattle lowing to drift across the yard. Finally, Harold spoke. "Why?" "Because I will not live in shadows," Hope said. Her voice trembled, but she held firm. "I love him. He loves me, and I would rather face the world with him than live gilded and empty without." Whitmore's gaze slid to Owen. "Is that true?" Obin met his stare, his heart hammered, but his voice came steady. "Yes," the older-most studied him, as cold as steel. "Do you think words make a laugh? Do you think a girl can live on your promise?" "He cannot give her land or coin," Owen admitted. "But I can give her truth. He can give her loyalty. He can give her every breath I have left." Whitmore's lips tightened. He stepped forward until he stood just inside the doorway, his broad frame casting a shadow across them. "And when the town turns its back, when men spit at her feet, when children call her names, will you stop every tongue? Will you fight every whisper?" Obin did not flinch. "He will fight what I can, and what I cannot, I will bear beside her." For the first time, Margaret spoke. Her voice was soft, tremulous, but steady. "Harold." Her husband ignored her. He looked only at his daughter. "You would throw away comfort, a future with security." For this, Hope's eyes glistened. "Father, comfort without love is a prison. You taught me to speak truth. Well, here is mine. My home is where he is." The words struck Harold like a blow. His jaw tightened. His hand twitched at his side, but he kept his composure. Slowly, he stepped back and pointed toward the yard. "Get off my land." Ope's breath caught. "Father, get off my land," he repeated, voice like iron. His eyes flicked to Owen, burning. "And if you ever bring her back here, you'll answer to more than words." Owen felt Hope's hand tremble in his. He wanted to speak, to plead, but pride sealed his lips. He would not beg for permission to love. Margaret moved then, stepping past her husband. Her hand brushed her daughter's arm, lingering for a moment. Her eyes filled with unshed tears, but she said nothing. Only pressed something small into Hope's palm, a folded piece of cloth before retreating. The door closed. A bolt slid into place. For a long moment, the two stood on the porch, silence ringing louder than any shout. Ope unfolded the cloth. It was a handkerchief worn soft from years of use. Embroidered in the corner in delicate faded thread was the letter H. She clutched it to her chest and looked at Owen. Her eyes were wet but fierce. "We build our own home." He searched her face. "You would leave all this?" He left it the moment he shut the door. She whispered. Owen felt the ground shift beneath him. For years he had walked in shadows, content to survive unnoticed. Now this woman stood beside him, ready to set fire to every expectation. She would not yield, and he realized neither could he. He nodded. "Then we start today." That evening they returned to Owen's clearing. The air smelled of moss-white smoke. The sky painted in hues of copper and violet. Ope moved among his few belongings without complaint, her dress brushing the dirt, her hair catching the light. She knelt by the fire and fed it with dry sticks as though she had done it 100 times. Oben watched her, his chest tightening. "It's not much," he said. "It's enough," she replied. He crouched beside her. "It will be hard." She smiled faintly, eyes shining in the firelight. Ebe never been afraid of heart. For the first time in many years, Owen allowed himself to smile. It was small, fragile, but real. The night deepened, crickets sang, the river murmured, and the cottonwoods whispered their endless secrets. In the flicker of the fire, two hands found each other and did not let go. The door of her father's house had closed, but in its place another door had opened, one they would build together from nothing but love and stubborn courage. By the time autumn settled fully over the valley, the story of Owen Ten Crow and Hope Whitmore had become common talk in Grady's Fork. The town was small, and small towns bred rumors like fish over spilled molasses. Men carried it to the saloon with their whiskey. Women folded it into their laundry lines, and children absorbed it at their mothers' knees. Whitmore's girl's gone and lost her wits. Sis living out there in the dirt with him. No roof but brushwood, no larder, but what he trips. At first, it was just whispers. But whispers Owen knew could cut deeper than knives. They turned neighbors into strangers, friends into enemies. He felt the shift every time he walked into town. Once the blacksmith would nod at him. Now he kept his eyes fixed on the forge. The historique pair, who once gave him fair measure, began weighing flour twice as though convinced Owen was stealing ounces with his gaze. And when Hope walked at his side, the stares grew sharper. Women pulling their children close, men sneering into their beards. Hope, stubborn as stone, pretended not to see. She carried herself proud, chin lifted, each step a declaration. But Owen saw the way her hand trembled when they returned to camp. The way she pressed her face into her shawl when she thought he wasn't watching. He wanted to shield her. But how did a man fight shadows? The breaking point came one evening at the livery. Owen had gone to trade pelts for grain. Hope had insisted on coming. She said she would not hide from the world. The sun was low, spilling long shadows across the corral. As Owen loaded the grain sack onto his shoulder, three men stepped out from behind the stalls. Jonas Hawley led them. He was a foreman from a neighboring ranch, broad-shouldered with a grin that carried no humor. He had once courted Hope, if bullying her with flowers and loud boasts could be called courting, and he had never forgiven her refused refusal. Now bitterness had fermented into cruelty. "Well, look here," Jonas drawled, blocking their path. "The Whitmore girl and her half-breed buck. Hope's laugh in the bushes treating you, darling? Got fleas yet?" Owen said nothing. He shifted the grain on his shoulder and moved to pass. Jonas stepped in front of him again. "What's the matter? Too proud to speak. Or maybe you only grunt in that savage tongue of yours." Ope's eyes blazed. "Leave us be, Jonas. Is near it. Funny. I recall your father raising you for finer things. Now you're no better than squat trash." Owen's grip tightened on the grain sack. Every muscle taut. His blood thundered in his ears, but he forced himself still. He remembered Harold's words. "Prove yourself by walking away." But Jonas wasn't done. He spat at the ground near Hope's feet. "Guess the Whitmore name don't mean much anymore." That was enough. Owen dropped the sack and moved like a storm breaking. His hand shot to Jonas's collar, slamming him against the stall. The wood rattled, dust billowing. Jonas' eyes widened, fear flashing for the first time. The other two men lunged, but Owen's bow was in his hand before they closed the distance. He didn't knock an arrow. It didn't need to. The curve of seasoned wood, the taut string drawn back halfway, was warning enough. "Back," Owen growled. The men hesitated. They had seen him hunt. They knew he did not miss. Ope stepped forward then, her voice ringing clear. "You will not speak my name in filth again, Jonas Hawley. Not while I breathe." The words hung like iron in the air. For a moment, no one moved. Then Jonas shoved free, face red, and spat once more, not at Hope this time, but at the dirt. "This ain't over," he muttered. He turned, jerking his chin at his companions, and the three stalked off into the shadows. Owen lowered his bow slowly. His chest heaved, but his eyes were steady. Ope reached for his hand, and he let her take it. But even as they walked away, he felt the weight of unseen eyes. Others had watched. Others would talk. By nightfall, the story would be across town, told and retold until it twisted like barbed wire. That night in camp, Hope knelt by the fire, her hands trembling as she fed it sticks. Owen watched her, the flames painting her face in shades of copper. "You were brave," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes shining with both fear and pride. "He only spoke the truth," he crouched beside her. "The truth has a cost." "So does silence," she whispered, thinking of the night he had tried to push her away. He bowed his head, unable to answer. From the dark, Bristle gave a low growl. Owen rose, scanning the terrain. Nothing moved but the wind through the moss quiet. Still, he knew trouble lingered. Men like Jonas did not let go. He turned back to Hope. "Whatever storm comes, I will stand with you." Her eyes softened. She reached for his hand. "That's all I need." Word spread fast. By week's end, the saloon buzzed with it. Men clinked mugs, voices thick with whiskey and scorn. Whitmore's girl protecting an Apache. "Fool thing will get herself ruined." It should have been run out long ago, but not all voices agreed. Some muttered that Jonas had gone too far, that a man was entitled to defend his woman. A few even admitted grudgingly that Owen had shown restraint by not driving an arrow through the foreman's chest. Even Sheriff Cobb, weary from years of keeping fragile peace, heard the talk. He sat in his office, black smoke curling around him, and thought long on the matter. Trouble was brewing. He could feel it in his bones. For Ope, the whispers were constant. At the well, women turned their backs. At the mercantile, no one offered her greetings. Children, once playmates, stared wide-eyed, but said nothing. She bore it with pride. But at night, Owen heard the quiet hitch in her breath as she laid her head down, the tears she thought he didn't see. One evening, as the sky bled violet, she stood at the edge of their clearing, watching the river glimmer silver. "They hate me," she said softly. "They hate what they do not understand," Owen answered. She turned, her face pale in the twilight. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me?" He stepped forward, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Never. I regret only the time I wasted trying to send you away." She closed her eyes, leaning into his hand. "Then I can bear their hate." The river whispered on, carrying her words into the dark. But Owen knew the storm was not over. It had only begun. Winter crept early into the valley that year. Frost dusted the meadows by mid-November, and the cottonwoods stood bare, their silver leaves scattered like fondies lost in the dirt. Smoke curled from chimneys in Grady's Fork, the scent of pine pitch clinging to the cold air. At the Whitmore ranch, silence lingered heavier than snow. Harold Whitmore had not spoken of his daughter since the day he shut his door. Margaret moved about her chores with lips pressed in, though her eyes sometimes strayed to the ridge where the cottonwoods grew. Neither parent went to town often now. Whispers that cut sharper than knives, and even Harold's iron pride could not steal the sting of his neighbor's judgment. But in the clearing by the river, life stirred differently. Hope and Owen built their small cabin with their own hands. Rough-hewn logs notched together, a roof patched with bark and tar, a chimney that smoked stubbornly but gave warmth. It was no manor house, but each board carried the weight of their labor and their laughter. Ope learned to split kindling, to mend snares, to wash clothes in the cold river. Owen learned to plant late-season beans in the small patch of cleared earth, to hang curtains she had sewn, to smile when she teased him about crooked rafters. They lived with little, but it was theirs. And at night, when the fire glowed, and her head rested against his shoulder, the world's cruelty seemed far away. Yet the world did not forget them. Jonas Hawley lingered like a bird in the hide. Though proud to swallow defeat, too spiteful to let silence lie, he stirred men in the saloon with whiskey and poison words. "We going to let Whitmore's girl shame us all, living with a savage in our own valley?" Some muttered agreement, others stayed quiet, but Jonas's voice carried. One bitter night, as frost clung to the windows of their cabin, Owen woke to Bristle's growl. It rose silently, bow in hand, and stepped outside. In the moonlight, three figures shifted near the tree torches in hand. One voice whispered, another laughed. Owen's muscles tightened. But before the torches moved closer, Sheriff Cobb rode into view, lantern swinging from his saddle. Go home, Sheriff said flatly. Ain't no good comes of fire in the night. Grumbling, the men scattered. Jonah's face glared from the dark, eyes burning hate. Owen lowered his bow, and Sheriff Cobb met his gaze. Keep your head down, Ten Crow, trouble's thick as storm clouds. Owen nodded once, he knew. As winter deepened, hope fellowed for several days, fever burning through her like wildfire. Owen sat beside her mind, cooling her brow with damp cloths, whispering words in Apache and in English, prayers mixed with promises. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless, not against hunger, not against hate, but against the fragility of the one he loved. When she finally stirred awake, cheeks flushed but as clear, he bowed his head and whispered, "You carry my heart. Don't let it go." She reached for his hand. "Then we'll carry each other." By February, the fever of gossip had burned itself thin. People had grown tired of scandal. Some still sneered, but others began to soften. They saw hope in town, steady-eyed, shoulders straight, refusing shame. They saw Owen trading pelts for supplies, respectful, calm, never raising his voice. Even Harold Whitmore, from the distance of his porch, began to feel the edges of his anger dull. One afternoon, Margaret appeared at their cabin, carrying a basket of bread and cloth. She said little, only kissed her daughter's cheek and lingered long on Owen's face before leaving. But when Hope unfolded the cloth later, she found it was a baby blanket, finally sewn, the edges embroidered with delicate thread. Hope pressed it to her heart, tears brightening her eyes. Owen laid his hand over her as wordless, but the weight of it was promise enough. Spring thaw came slow. Snow melted from the ridges, turning creeks into torrents. The air saw, carrying the scent of new grass. Birds returned, and with them a fragile peace. One Sunday, Hope and Owen walked hand in hand back to the cottonwoods. The trees had begun to bud, pale green against dark bark. Beneath their branches, the river glittered in sunlight. Hope carried the baby blanket in her arms, though her belly had only just begun to swell. She smiled faintly, placing Owen's hand against her side. "Do you feel it?" He shook his head. "Not yet," she said softly. But soon Owen looked out over the river, the land stretching wide and endless. He had once thought himself a shadow, a man destined only to survive. But standing here with Hope at his side and new life stirring within her, he felt something he had never dared claim. Belonging. He turned to her, his voice rough but steady. "I can't give you gold. Hope can't give you land like your father's, but I will give you everything I am, and when the world whispers, we will answer with our lives." Her eyes glistened. "That's all I ever asked." It's that evening. As they returned to their cabin, Harold Whitmore stood waiting at the edge of the clearing. His figure was rigid, his face stern, but his eyes wavered when they fell on his daughter's swelling form. For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind stirred the cottonwoods, filling the silence. At last, Harold said, gruff and halting. "That cabin still stands. Guess you built better than I gave you credit." Owen straightened. "It stands because she holds it up with me." Hope stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Father, you shut the door on me. But my life did not end outside it. It began." Harold's jaw tightened. His gaze slid to Owen. For an instant, old bitterness flared, but then he saw Hope's hand slip into Owen's, steady and sure, and something inside him bent. He exhaled long and weary. "Cotton wood's a soft wood. Bends easy, don't break. Maybe I was wrong about what's strong." Without another word, he turned and walked back toward the ridge. Hope clung to Owen's hand, her breath trembling. "Did you hear him? He didn't curse. He didn't shut the door." Owen nodded, though his throat was too tight for words. That night, under the cottonwoods, Owen and Hope sat together as the fire burned low. The stars wheeled above, cold and endless, but in the circle of their arms there was warmth. Bree still lay by the fire, tail twitching in sleep. Ope leaned her head on Owen's shoulder, whispering, "We have a long road ahead." He kissed her hair, "We'll walk it together." The cottonwoods whispered overhead, their faces soft with spring wind. And in that sound, Owen thought he heard the name he had once tried to silence hope spoken back to him, carried into the dark, not as burden, but as promise. For the first time in his life, he believed it. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this story. I'm truly glad you stayed with me. Your support means so much. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel so I can keep bringing you more heartfelt stories like this.